everyone. Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Thanks so much for being here. This is your daily spiritual check-in with the Bhakti Center. My name is Dayal Gurunga, and I will be very shortly joined by our friend and co-host for the week, Kishore Gopal, who's been joining us, and we've having some really beautiful discussions. Thank you so much for being here. This is your daily check-in. Couple quick announcements. As I've been saying, this is last chance to join the Bhakti Center's Ayurveda Spring Cleanse. We have a Spring Cleanse, 8-day Khichdi cleanse led by my wife, Rasika Gopi. You can check it out at the Bhakti Center's website. It's an 8-day cleanse. You'll be guided through how to make, prepare, consume, absorb Khichdi into your life as a way to nourish yourself while creating space for just releasing toxins in the body and setting yourself up. Just as the seasons are changing, the body also changes and releases things that no longer needs to hold on to. So check that out at bhakticenter.org. And as I've been saying, we're looking for a media team at the Bhakti Center, specifically for Spirit Matters, a Spirit Matters media team that wants to help us produce reels and quotes and images that we can use to promote and share what we discuss on the podcast. If you'd like to be a part of that, write to us at spiritmatters@bhakticenter.org. I'm here with Kishore Gopal. How you doing, Kishore? I'm going spotlight that beautiful man. There he is.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Happy to be here.
Very good and happy to be here. All right. Whoo! Last week, this week, yesterday, we've been reading this 10th verse of the 4th chapter, Bhagavad Gita, being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me, and taking refuge in me. Many persons in the past become purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. Is there a thought, question, reflection that we left off that we should continue today's conversation, or should we read the commentary and see where we go? Over to you, Kishore. Oh, he muted himself.
Oh, sorry.
There he is.
Yeah, we can read. We can keep reading.
All right. Do you want to read, or you want me to read?
You can read.
Okie dokies. Commentary. Again, I will read the verse. Being freed from attachment, fear, and anger. We talked a lot about attachment this week and detachment and how there's healthy and unhealthy ways of going about that. Being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me. So that's the walking towards something as opposed to just running away from something. So whenever we put something down, we're creating space for something else. And a lot of spiritual life can be wrapped up in the obsession with the negative, the things that aren't good for me, the things that I shouldn't do, the things that are bad for me, the ways that I'm fallen, and whatever it might be, without realizing that actually there's something positive that we're walking towards. And so here, Krishna's mentioning being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, that supreme absolute truth. Many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me. So we talked a lot about knowledge and wisdom and being situated and understanding things for what they are, and that a lot of our attachment and detachment simply is a byproduct of knowledge, understanding things like, oh, okay, I know what I'm looking for, and I know what's going to give it to me and not give it to me, and what's good for me and not good for me. And thus they all attained transcendental love for me. And Srila Prabhupada in his commentary is going to focus a lot on this idea of transcendental love, divine love for the individual soul and the supreme soul, that if love is the highest reality, then that God becomes defined by that being with which we can exchange the deepest love with. And Prabhupada's gonna reference the challenge and difficulty to wrestle with that idea and the misconceptions we can have along the way. So that's our tee up for today, and we're going to read the commentary. Here we go. As described above, it is very difficult for a person who is too materially affected to understand the personal nature of the supreme absolute truth. Generally, people who are attached to the bodily conception of life are so absorbed in materialism that it is also almost impossible for them to understand how the supreme can be a person. Such materialists cannot even imagine that there is a transcendental body which is imperishable, full of knowledge, and eternally blissful. Satchit Ananda. In the materialistic concept, the bodily is perishable, full of ignorance, and completely miserable. Therefore, people in general keep this same bodily idea in mind when they are informed of the personal form of the Lord. For such materialistic peeps, the form of the gigantic material manifestation is supreme. Consequently, they consider the supreme to be impersonal. And because they are too materially absorbed, the conception of retaining the personality after liberation from matter frightens them. When they are informed that spiritual life is also individual and personal, they become afraid of becoming persons again, and so they naturally prefer a kind of merging into the impersonal void. Generally, they compare the living entities to the bubbles of the ocean, which merge into the ocean. That is the highest perfection of spiritual existence attainable without individual personality. This is a kind of fearful stage of life devoid of perfect knowledge of spiritual existence. Furthermore, there are many persons who cannot understand spiritual existence at all. Being embarrassed by so many theories and by contradictions of various types of philosophical speculation, they become disgusted or angry and foolishly conclude that there is no supreme cause and that everything is ultimately void. Such persons are in a diseased condition of life. I'm going to skip down a little bit and get to another point. So Prabhupada mentions about the idea of having misconceptions, and he mentions to get free from these stages of the material concept of life, excuse me, one has to take complete shelter, excuse me, guided by the bona fide spiritual teacher, and follow the disciplines and regulative principles of devotional life. The last stage of devotional life is called bhava, or transcendental love of Godhead. And then he gives this beautiful sequence of spiritual life described by Rupa Goswami, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. In the beginning, one must have a preliminary desire for self-realization. This will bring one to the stage of trying to associate with persons who are spiritually elevated. In the next stage, one becomes initiated by an elevated spiritual master, and under his instruction, the neophyte devotee begins the process of devotional service. By execution of devotional service under the guidance of the spiritual master, one becomes free from material attachment, attains steadiness and self-realization, and acquires a taste for hearing about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. This taste leads one further forward to attachment for Krishna consciousness, which is matured in bhava, or the preliminary stage of transcendental love. Real love for God is called prema, the highest perfectional stage of life. In the prema stage, there is constant engagement in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. So, by the slow process of devotional service, under the guidance of the bona fide spiritual master, one can attain the highest stage, being freed from all material attachment, from the fearfulness of one's individual spiritual personality, and from the frustrations that result in void philosophy. Then one can ultimately attain to the abode of the Supreme. Okay, I didn't plan to read that much, but it just kept on going, and I felt like it was a thread that needed to see its way to completion. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I want to turn it over to you, Kishore Gopal. And what are your thoughts, reflections? What stuck out to you, and what can we dive into today?
Well, I'm just reading through again, and what stands out to me first, he says, generally, people who are attached to the bodily concept of life are so absorbed in materialism, it is almost impossible for them to understand how the Supreme can be a person. They can't imagine that there's a transcendental body full of knowledge and bliss. In the materialistic concept, the body is perishable, and miserable. Therefore, people in general keep this same bodily idea when they're informed of the personal form of the Lord. Then he says, because they're too materially absorbed, the conception of retaining the personality after liberation from matter frightens them.
Ooh.
When they are informed that spiritual life is also an individual and personal, they become afraid of becoming persons again. So they prefer kind of merging into the impersonal void. So that was really fascinating. That because we are so, in a conditioned state, and specifically if we're more materially minded, if we are, too much affected by the material conception of life, we can't accommodate for the personality, the personalism that is obviously a radical part of spirituality. And that the leaning towards the impersonal reality, or that everything is just like a void or just a merge of space or whatever, is not. It's interesting that he says that is coming from a place of fear, because we can't conceptualize or understand or have the capacity to accommodate for a more personal reality. And I just find it to be very, very interesting. And it reminds me, I don't know why, but the word that comes up for me is like being emotionally unavailable, like being emotionally unavailable for Krishna or for ourselves. Because when someone's emotionally unavailable, it's like you can put them in a group of a bunch of, you know, loving, caring extroverts who will ask them all the questions and do everything to like kind of get them to open up, but they just won't be able to do it. And like their approach to relationships is vague, like they're afraid of commitment or whatever. It's very vague, their approach, because they can't handle that personalism of like being vulnerable and being very specific about what you're looking for, in a partner, et cetera, or like what your triggers are. So it's just like an interesting explanation. I think it's really brilliant from Srila Prabhupada that we have this kind of like unavailability to personalism out of fear of perhaps also it's a fear of responsibility, because at another place, Srila Prabhupada says that the human form of life means heavy responsibility. Whether it means a responsibility to ourselves to find our own, to uplift ourselves and really passionately seek out our own spiritual emancipation. And so I find that to be really, really, very insightful. Like it's like, it's pretty amazing, actually.
I really love and appreciate, the reflection on your part and the idea of emotional unavailability. And spiritual life in some ways is a process where we are taking the vulnerable step to be emotionally available towards higher truth. And that I think bhakti inherently is the idea of bringing emotions into spiritual life in a healthy, mature, responsible way. And so somebody's once talking about various types of yoga: karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga. And somebody was saying that karma is like the developing the culture of action, and jnana is developing the culturing the intellect, and bhakti is culturing our emotions in a way that bring us closer to ourselves and towards higher truth. And sometimes it can be very easy to some people will say like, I don't feel loved, I don't feel like. Just because you don't feel loved doesn't mean that there aren't people who are loving you. And that sometimes a big part of feeling loved means learning to open up starting to take down some of the walls that we've built around our heart because of our and Prabhupada very very honestly acknowledges that um that there's fear because of our material experiences in life. um the materialistic concept the body is perishable, full of ignorance, and in many ways a source of misery. Like we get hurt, you know love hurts
Mm.
in the material world, and so we're just naturally responding to our experiences of pain and disappointment and abuse sometimes, or trauma, or whatever it might be, and so we're protecting ourselves. um but then what happens is that sometimes we miss out on um when love is actually being offered to us. We're not able to recognize it. And so I think what Prabhupada is encouraging us here is that when we start to come to spiritual life, genuine spiritual life matures into a experience of the soul, and the soul is inherently individual. Krishna makes this point, and Prabhupada highlights it at the beginning of the Gita. The first instruction that Krishna gives to Arjuna, Tattvaham jatu nasham, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor anybody else in creation, and nor shall any of us cease to be, meaning that we have always existed as individuals. We exist individually now, and will continue to exist as individuals in the future. I won't exist in the way of this particular mind and body and this shape and form that I've given in the material world, but my individuality. When we talk about self-realization, we inherently have to confront the fact that we are individual spirit souls, and that the soul is ultimately yearning for love and connection. And so in order for me to feel the deepest um, expression of the soul, the deepest satisfaction and fulfillment of the soul, I need to become willing to accept that I'm an individual, to accept that I'm inherently built for love and belonging and connection, that I'm inherently worthy of that. I don't have to earn it, but I'm inherently, it's part of my being. And that there's a supreme, loving, divine person that is extending that love to me and waiting to extend it to me, as to the extent that I'm willing to um, open myself up to receive it. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. Especially the last thing you said, being willing to open ourselves up to receive. Um,
Have there been
um,
times in your spiritual life, or I'm always asking the questions, but what does that look like for you to trust? I mean, to put it simply, the trust that God loves you. To
yeah,
put it simply,
yeah.
what does it look like to open myself up to the idea that eternally I have an ongoing relationship with God that's based on love, and to trust that? Because I think a lot of people are just like, I think a big part of our, we may not acknowledge it in these terms, but get to this place of just like, God doesn't love me. God doesn't love anybody.
Mm, mm,
How do
yeah,
we how do we do that?
right. Yeah. Well, two things come to mind. The first is that um, in order, I think learning to um, love ourselves, because if you don't love yourself, then you can't accept love from anybody else. And
Mm,
of course, there are levels of this. There's more of a material concept where you're basically just self-absorbed. But I believe that there's a way to love oneself on a spiritual level, uh, starting with understanding our identity as spirit, soul, and then seeing how to say, like accepting God's love on that level. Like I'm a spirit soul, and really I actually have, like, there are places where Krishna says, that he actually doesn't see any faults, because he's a completely transcendental being. He sees beyond the material from his vantage point. The things that we see in ourselves that we either hate in ourselves or don't like about ourselves, he completely ignores all those things.
Mm.
So to try to accept that love from a spiritual, perspective, understanding that we're spirit and we're not our mind and we're not our bad qualities, and we can try to extract our identity from all of our, things that bog us down, so to speak. And the second thing is, uh, just like availing ourselves to the effect of spiritual life. I found, I'll try to say this concisely, but I found that I've sometimes blocked the result of my spiritual practice because of my mental state. Like, oh, it's not going to work for me because I'm this or I'm that or whatever. And so it's like just opening ourselves, just accepting, just being open to receiving. And if we practice spiritual life with that mood or mindset of just being open to accepting, I think in that way, we will genuinely feel Krishna in our lives. Um,
Mm.
what I've seen of people who I like look up to who are very spiritually advanced, they don't ever say things like, "Oh, I'm not good enough for spiritual life," or my practice is really bad." They're always extremely positive, and they're always talking. They always celebrate everything that they experience in spiritual life. So
Mm.
I always find that to be a very consistent theme with people who I look up to as my spiritual guides and role models.
Mm. Tell me more about celebrating every experience.
Um, well, like recently um, when I was in California, and Vaisheshika Prabhu was there. He's a senior member of our spiritual community, and he's like that. It's almost like to a point where I'm like, it's kind of excessive. Like he always talks about how amazing spiritual life is, and he's being serious. And he always talks about how like wonderful it is, and he always shares about the experiences that he has, even small things. He sees value in every small thing that happens in his life.
Mm.
He sees everything as like a blessing, and but he's so, and it's not like just a frilly kind of thing, because he's such a like a strong personality, and he really walks his talk. So you see how he expresses and shares his realizations about his spiritual life, and it's like so genuine. And so it's like everything. Um, and then he also like he goes in like 100%. Like say for example, like we hear if you like all the different benefits of chanting, and it's like how have we really availed ourselves to all of that, or in our head are we thinking that's not going to happen for me? Maybe for this person when I chant they feel this, but for me it's not going to happen. I feel like that matters. And when we can and just be like, because also in Bhagavad Gita Krishna says that bhakti is joyfully performed, and I think like he really exemplifies that. He everything about spiritual life is enjoyable to him, and whenever he has a realization or something becomes clearer to him, he always shares it in such a, yeah, enthusiastic way. And I think there's a way to, yeah, start to give ourselves credit sometimes for things that we've achieved. I think that's something like maybe sometimes we become confused about, oh, like we need to be humble or whatever. But I think it's worth it. Give ourselves some credit if we make some progress, and appreciate ourselves for the effort that we've put in. And yeah, so that's what I can think of right now.
I really, really love that a lot. And I think, as you mentioned, giving ourselves credit at time. Martha wrote a great question in the chat, but don't you think at the beginning they also questioned their spirituality, and as they matured, their perception and reality became more clear? I think definitely. I think also what you find in a lot of very advanced souls is that there's tremendous humility,
Mm,
but it comes in the form of also gratitude. There's that beautiful quote that I've been referencing recently from Mother Teresa, where she says, "Give yourself fully to God. He will use you to do great things as long as you believe more in the power of his greatness than in your own weakness."
mm,
And so it's like that, yes, I have my shortcomings and I doubt myself and I'm unsure, but I believe in the power of higher, I believe in the power of higher love. I believe that power is available to all of us and that none of us, including me, is disqualified from that. And I'm looking for the ways in which it's being extended to me every day. And I'm giving myself credit for the ways in which I'm reaching out for, and I'm celebrating that. I think Vaisheshika Guru is such a great example. He has that phrase, fan the spark, and it's like, can I see the little sparks of love in my life that are my own sincerity, and I just learn to fan that spark, and where do I catch myself? It's really about, almost, if you want to even look at like on a biological level, it's about like creating new neural pathways. My mind is conditioned and used to going to the negative. I stink. I'm a piece of crap. Nothing good. Nothing. Anybody have this thought? Nothing good ever happens to me. Nothing good ever works out for me. No relationships ever work out for me, you know. Nothing good ever happens to me. We build these, that's a narrative. And then what happens, we just get used to thinking those thoughts. And then when something new happens that may or may not be true, we like, there's evidence. We all of a sudden take a neutral piece of information, a neutral circumstance, and we warp that into a piece of evidence to fit into our conditioned way of thinking. And we're just deepening those trenches of neural pathways in our brain to think a certain way. And like you're saying, what you're saying, I think, Martha, in that sense, like they're committed to building new neural pathways. They're committed to building new ways of thinking. They're committed to like, wow, maybe instead of thinking nothing goes my way, maybe look at this one little thing that went right and be like, that's amazing. That's beautiful. And how can I start to think more like that? And so celebrating, and I think we don't give ourselves credit enough. You're here. If you're listening today, right now, you've done it. You've done it. Excuse me, I can't even get my words out. You've done an amazing thing, and you're doing amazing work, and you're making an effort, and you're making progress, and you've made it to the end of an entire episode. Show something. You're reaching out, and that's beautiful. And so glad that you're here, and so glad that you've been with us here, Kishore. Thank you so much. And we are at our time for today and this week. We're going to turn it over to Kimberly to take it away for us and give us a few takeaways. So if you want a few little phrases or ending thoughts, please tune in. She'll share them with us. And then Kishore and I will give a couple closing words, and then we will wrap up for today. So what do you got, Kimberly?
Today, we're taking away to accommodate for personalism.
Mm,
Take the vulnerable step to be emotionally available for spiritual truth. And if we're giving ourselves credit for all the bad stuff, we got to give ourselves credit for the good stuff too. Because Krishna doesn't see any faults, and we can build new neural pathways by celebrating everything experienced in spiritual life. Thank you.
Thank you. Kishore, what's your closing word for today, for this week? Anything?
Just find we find one thing in spiritual life that we really find joy in, and just hold on to that really tightly. I think that's for all of those seniors or role models, however you want to call them, who've been around for many years and they've been through really tough and trying times. I think that's something that they did, that they really just were committed to seeing the beauty uh, uh, in their spiritual life, and there was something that they really held on to. And I know for me, like Kirtan has been that in my life. That's just like a constant, like no matter what's happening, even if everything is just like a total mess, that's always there. So finding something in spiritual life that we can open ourselves up to, allow it to kind of touch us in a vulnerable way, and then we can hold on to that, and it kind of pulls us forward. So yeah.
I have one last closing question for you before we finish. When are you moving to New York?
I'm still working on it. Still working on it.
Evasive. My takeaway, my appreciation is I really wanted to appreciate you, Kishore Gopal, and also I think it's really beautiful to end on this note of personalism, because just seeing how the unique and beautiful qualities that we each bring. And I think spiritual life is so much appreciating the unity and diversity, and being able to appreciate the different ways in which we bring and we share. And it's I learn a lot from you, because we have so much in common in a lot of ways and a lot of similar values. And at the same time, there's just a lot of natural, just like I'm a big fiery ball of just blah, and you're very calming and very reflective and very like selective with your words and intentional. And so I actually appreciate that dynamic, and being able to like, oh wow, realize that we have our different moods and ways of being and reflecting and speaking and dialoguing. And it's like a garland. Like when you make a beautiful flower garland, you have all these different flowers. You have your jasmines and your roses and your marigolds and your what is the one with the G they use in Radha Govinda a lot? The
Gardenias.
gardenias. Those are so beautiful and smell so beautiful. Gardenias and the champucks and all of those different flowers. And they're all different, but they come together and they make a beautiful offering that we can give to Krishna. And so yeah, it's for when we look at personalism, we realize that like people don't have to be just like us, but we can connect deeply. A community means there's space for everybody, and we need that. And so I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to you moving to New York. I'm going to keep asking you. We got space. I got a little room for you. I got a little bed and a pillow and a little mint on the pillow and a little flower vase that I change every day to keep it fresh. So just waiting. All right, guys. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. Please go and leave us 5-star ratings and reviews on podcast platforms, wherever you listen and don't listen. Check out Last Chance today, starts tomorrow, Ayurveda Spring Cleanse. Check out my Instagram. I'm not just putting a post on my Instagram, but check out my Instagram because I put a question there. My wife is going to be our guest next week. And if you want to input what you want us to talk about and share, go in there and give us some input. It's the first time my wife and I are doing something public together. And so please tune in and give us some insight on what you want to hear. Love you all tremendously. See you all next week. Taking a break for the weekend. See you on Monday. Bye-bye.